All right, for this recording, I think you've all seen this before. I did an exercise on how to add, the siding entourage and stuff previously in a previous lesson, and so I figured I wanted to show you a really safe approach to playing and experimenting with color is to use a already kind of shaded, rendered in pencil view, and then you can put light washes of color on things to create uh, create some color. So here's an example where this is called a light wash because I'm using very little pigment, and I'm using a trick that I know about color, that it is a lot more muted as it's further away. So I'm going to add that color back here. It should be a really toned down color just to give us a suggestion of that background, whereas as we get closer, the color and the intensity of these items in the foreground can handle a lot more pigment. So going to shade in with color the base layer of color here for both of these shrubs. And then I'll use the darker green to define different layers, how they overlap. This is overlapping that one. We might have a little bit of shadows here between the levels, and then we'll add highlights. Highlights are going to be added at the tops and the edges where the shrubs stick out and are exposed to the sun. And I do the squiggly line thing a lot when I deal with shrubs and things, and I just want to, blend enough color in here so I don't know, it looks like a shrub. So there are our lovely little shrubs. See how much more intense the color is here as opposed to the background. Background's going to be muted. This probably would have maybe the same level of intensity over here. And let's do this kind of more blue-green for this plant here. I'm going to do a base wash first. And we'll use some brown for the structure. And I'm going to add a little highlight to that. That's what gives it the depth. Adding that highlight is going to give it depth and define it. And we're going to add one other green to this for a highlight. And I'll add a really dark green underneath for low lights. So I'll get multiple colors here, but see, that looks like a different green than this. These have more yellow green. This has more blue green to it. It's a different kind of plant. And let's see here. Why don't I do a cobalt blue for the planter? So on one side of this planter, I'm going to go with some heavy layers of blue, but I'm going to add red to make that more of a violet on one side, and then have it show up as a much brighter blue on the edge, so that's going to give it some shadow. If I want this to be the same kind of red siding that I was imagining, let's put the layer of red over the whole thing. Very light layer of red over the whole thing. And then certain areas I'm going to add some other colors to suggest shadows or shading. So this is my light wash I'm doing here. I might also go back through and define those that corrugated metal siding texture a little bit better, since that would probably be a little bit more noticeable than it is. Whoops, I kind of got myself out of shot here, didn't I? There we go. And these are the caps of those containers, so they would be the same color, I believe. So I'm gonna go in a different direction for starting up with my base color in those areas. Whoop, that would be also shaded in red. And let's see what happens if we were to add a few places where I'm going to use blue instead of black. I need this to be much sharper because I use that cobalt blue in the potted plant. A lot of times you can use the same color for shading or getting accentuating that corrugated metal. Now where I'm doing this is strategic. Think about like the edge of those containers. It's going to create this shadow that really shows up a lot more right at the top there, where that cap or those corners overlap the corrugated metal. We'd also see it a little bit more too at the bottom, but we don't necessarily need to see the entire line of the corrugated metal all the way up and down. So we can experiment with adding that in that blue color, creating that texture. You're going to see it a lot more in the shaded areas, and this is going to be a lot more defined up here because of the angle of the container. The angle of the container is kind of sideways. And I might hit this with another layer of red on this side, but using blue instead of black for this just kind of ends up pulling that color into the whole thing. But you see how we've lost the red a little bit, so I'm going to go back over it and intensify that red a little bit more on that front elevation and build up that color a little bit more. And then in certain areas we can get really intense with it. And I'm doing this around the portholes because I really want to bring your attention to those portholes a little bit more. So I'm just going to intensify the red around it. It's a little trick. Okay. Right at the edges here, where these caps are, let's make those a little bit redder, a little bit darker. The edges. And then here, this is in shadow a little bit. Okay, so you see how we can start to build some color. I want to see a little bit more intensity with this one. And now those blue lines have started to disappear a little bit more, but they're still there. They're still there, kind of doing their job and suggesting that texture. So next I want to actually grab a different color blue and a dark navy blue. If I can find that in my set, I think this is navy blue right here. because I want to create these windows that really look reflective. So I'm going to do a very dark navy in the corner and then do this really light blue reflecting the sky here. Dark, dark blue here in the corners. I'll bring that out even more. And then a very light blue for the rest. And that's going to make those windows pop out even more. Do the same thing up here. Blue, light, dark and light blue pigments. Where I have that white kind of edge on the inside, I want to fill that in with that light blue where we can see the sky reflected in those portholes too. And bring in that navy blue on the edge there. So that's going to make that seem a little bit more intense. We'll do the same thing to this window too. And then way off in the background, we have some kind of water element. So we can deal with that with a much, much lighter blue, very little pigment. Remember, as we see things way off in the background, you might not see quite as much intensity. I'm going to put a nice heavy line underneath here. That's the edge of the container, kind of creating a shadow on the foundation. And let's do a light wash of color back here for our ocean blue. Oh, we'll go with actually much darker here in the foreground. And that's also going to frame those trees in the background a little bit better. Sorry, I'm probably out of shot there. So much darker here. And then as we go out further, we're going to go lighter and lighter until it gets to be a really, really light blue. And we have some opportunities to, build up color here in the fence. Is that a brown fence? Is that a metal fence? Is it a white picket fence? That's all up to you. Is it a black fence? And any place you can start building in shading or shadow. I might pick brown and red, for instance, to throw a little bit of a shadow below this section here, because this overlaps that lower container. I think it's going to create a shadow something like that. And in those areas too, our color is going to be more intensified. On this side we can add our siding a little bit more defined over here. And when you're satisfied with it and the number of layers of color, we have some more things that we could color in here, and I shouldn't say color in, I should say render, to really start to make this pop. So the point of these exercises is to take the color that you learned from the color wheels and start blending those colors and making a composition and trying to convey what your final project is going to look like. Experiment with color, make several copies, and maybe try using different combinations to shade with. I used blue and red. Maybe I would rather use like a brown and red in the future, or also experiment with the intensity of your color. Maybe I want to really get this side to be super, super bright red, like the sun is hitting it, and this side over here is going to be a lot more like a dark brown, brownish red. But the point of it is to get pencil to paper and really play around with those colors and see what you get. You hopefully become pleasantly surprised. You can see from these examples I've showed you how to add color and a little bit of layers at a time. And these two now seem to be jiving somewhat, and showing the same, the same basic concept.